Hi, this is Christine Gilroy, and you are here to meet with Mark Boundy and I. We have some great things to talk about on an article that he just recently wrote that he's getting ready to publish. So I wanted to dive deep into that and also then brainstorm on some of the topics we're going to be introducing to you in season 2 of the Value Clarity podcast. So let me welcome Mark, and let's talk about the next things you've got going on, Mark.
Great. Thanks, partner. I really love our conversations, and I'm so thrilled that you and I get to spend this kind of time together.
Me too. So listen, you sent me this article on selling in 2020, which, we have to think all these things are changing around us, and we're still not even really sure how things are changing and what that means. So this article, I think, really spoke to me because it talks a lot about, are we doing a lot of activities, or are we knowledge professionals? And it sort of hits on one of my favorite quotes by Henry David Thoreau, which is, it's great to be busy, or it's not enough to be busy, so are the ants. So the question is, what are we busy about?
Yeah.
And I really feel like that's what you're driving at is in order to be really diving in deep into value, you have to be busy about doing the right thing. So talk to me about kind of your concept behind what you were thinking when you wrote this, and the things that you're trying to drive home.
Well, it started with the plans that we had for the Value Clarity podcast in season 2. One of the areas is, what is sales going to look like in 2020 and beyond? Because the world has changed, and what's that going to be? And then I had this moment of maybe not self-doubt, but I wanted to ask myself, is this really true? Because we all tell ourselves, hey, we need to be valued advisor, trusted advisors. And in the business where you've been in enterprise software and the cloud software, in most of my clients who are in that business and highly differentiated, yeah, you do need to be a valued consultant and a trusted advisor. But does everybody? I've noticed there's been some sales training companies, they're really successful at automating scripts for people and automating activities. And it's a great approach. And you and I are thinking, that's insane. That's absolute insanity. And so I had that moment of reflection where I said, all right, is it always true? Does everybody have to be a trusted advisor? Or are there some businesses and some sales environments where you don't have to be, or maybe you shouldn't be? And so that was the thought behind this article.
Yeah, I think you're getting at is it should look different for the different buyer, right?
Yeah.
So in my world, from an enterprise perspective, a lot of the time we do, and we have to be able to bring things to the table and bring that value to the table. But as we start to have more educated customers on the other end, a lot of it's going to be automated, and we're going to see things change. As you know, I'm a huge fan of technology and CRM, and I think that it's, what are we automating is the key, is what are we having them do, and what activities are we tracking, and what activities are we recommending for them? And these are conversations that I struggle with, but I also have really robust discussions with the guys at Ventellis who built the VinSales app. Yeah. And they built it for the salespeople in mind, rather than automating a bunch of useless tasks. They're trying to say, hey, we built a platform that leverages artificial intelligence that can automate some of the stuff that you need your sellers to do regardless. Yeah. But the core foundation is, I am automating things that a company says needs to happen in a sales cycle. And so what we're getting at here is, how do we determine what those things are? What are those important things that should be done? And that's very company specific, but also buyer specific, even with the different personas within the same customer. So from your experience, and that's, I mean, you've done this for your whole career. What is the driving force behind how you determine what values you should be offering and what activities you should be offering for the sales reps to follow? That's the whole method. How do you decide that, Mark?
Yeah, I was thinking back to when you and I first met in San Francisco at an event, and we were both attendees at that event, and I was still at Miller Hyman, and you said, well, not every sales methodology is a one size fits all. There's, and I was like crushed by that internally, because, I was still selling something that was good for everybody. But I've grown and matured since then. And so I did some thinking about this and I came up with this little 2x2 matrix, right? And it's two different axes of the customer's buying journey. And one is how complex is it? And complexity is either short cycle versus long cycle, short cycle and a small buying team, like an individual single person, versus a really complex one. And normally they go together, a long cycle with lots of people, but some combination of long cycle and highly complex buying decision, and then how comfortable that buyer is in that, right? How flexible their buying decision is. Is it something they really feel confident in? They've bought it a bunch of times. And so this is our buying process for it. And we're just locked in because we know what we want to buy and our buying process is locked. Versus up here, boy, we are unfamiliar with the problems, unfamiliar with the implications. We've never bought this before. We think we know what we want, but we're still not sure. And so that buying process is very flexible. And so down here, when it's a short, constant buying process and everybody's really comfortable, you're a fulfillment specialist, you're an order taker. And so I think down here in that quadrant, that script-based, highly automated sales that doesn't sell a ton of value because the customer already knows it, that's probably the good play. Up here on the far corner, sorry about my hand appearing on the upper right-hand corner, you've got that valued consultant. It's a complex buying decision. The customer is really insecure in their knowledge and their self-perceived ability. And at that point, you need to be a valued consultant. And then in the other two corners, when it's well-known, but a complicated buying decision, as a seller, you just have to make sure you're juggling all the moving parts in that buying decision. The customer is going to go through their process. They're very comfortable in it. You're not going to be able to change it. But if you miss out on one of the buyers, you're going to either miss the sale or you're going to extend the sale. And then up in that upper right hand, where it's a simple buying cycle with very few people, but that buyer is not particularly comfortable buying it, now you have to be a trusted expert on a one-on-one basis. It's almost a consultative one-call sale. And so those are kind of the situations. And so that was the way that I thought through, hey, when is it good to be a valued consultant? And what does that look like? And how does that feel like? And so this kind of helped me think through it. And so I wanted to write an article to share it with people.
I like it. I think it also changes through the sales cycle, right? So it depends on, as you're going through the cycle, who you're talking to, it's going to change as well.
Yes.
And so this week I had conversations with a friend of mine who does marketing consulting, and he's a fairly sizable consulting organization, and they specifically focus on marketing and developing personas for the sales teams and things like that and their marketing strategies. And what he says to me is, look, it's a 2 phone call. We close deals. They could be worth $1 million, but it's a 2 phone call conversation because they have it down with what the value is that they're bringing and what they sell, and they know who their targeted audience is. So the persona that they're selling to is a sophisticated buyer, and they know what they're doing. And so he can get it done within a couple of phone calls. Maybe not always the $1 million deal, but he can at least seed the account with a small engagement after 2 phone calls. Yeah. And then you go into the maturing the relationship and doing different things. But in this scenario, it breaks down, and the perfect for that model of where he's developed it. His sellers don't necessarily have to always be that trusted expert or the value consultant, because they can close it out in a couple of phone calls and then bring them in later to enrich it and develop it further.
That's exactly, yeah, you're exactly right, Christine, because a lot of times you as an expert might be able to offer some value either after that first sale or during that first sale that makes that decision more complex. And so you actually want to move the customer, add more people to the buying influence. I had a recent podcast with Alessandro Duragan, who sells connectors, which is, a really automated rote buying process. But he was saying, well, when we're a little bit more reliable for some applications, some customers, where that connector is going to be plugged and unplugged a bunch of times, the Indian competitor that also meets specs is going to fail. And so we have to add in the reliability engineers, and we have to add in the technical support and the field service at our customers, for how they service the finished product to their customers, and add them to the buying process. So there's reasons why you might want to actually move your customer up. And similarly, if we can add value and teach our customers new ways to think about the product, they go from trusting their very locked in process to being a little bit more flexible. So I got a little bit snarky and said, if you don't have any value and you never want to have any value, stick to the scripts. If you want to have value or have more value, now you've got to learn how to sell value. You've got to become that trusted expert.
Yeah, there's a difference in that. That's the sticking to the script. There's the art and the science of it, right? Scripts are kind of scientific. It's say these things and we know the result will be this. And so intelligent buyers and buyers that are more comfortable with the technology or the solution or the service, whatever they're buying, are not going to allow you to stick to the script.
Yeah.
They're going to want you to come off script, and they're going to almost purposely take you off script. And so you have to be able to put a little bit of your own flavor and your art in it. And the best way to do that is with that knowledge and those insights. And you talk a little bit about that later on where, excuse me, you talk about in the customer's decision in the organization around the value of what's their perceived value, and how do you move your sale through that process to help build that value. So what are you doing when they do take you off script?
Yeah. And it's all about when they take you off the script and you go into that tunnel vision, that brain lock tunnel vision, it's all about the customer outcome. So start thinking about what is a customer outcome? What outcome did we just shift the topic to? And now let me get into the customer's mind and understand what they were talking about. What's the outcome? So don't reflexively come back to our features or our price. Go back to what was, when in doubt, talk about a customer outcome.
Interesting. I bought something this week that was local, Mark, and I knew the guy was overpriced and it was charging me too much. I'd done my research. I knew what it was, but I'm really big right now into buying local because I think our local entrepreneurs, our local stores, our local folks are having a harder time with COVID. And so it's much easier to buy on Amazon. So as much as I buy on Amazon, I'm trying to balance it out with buying locally. And I forced him through that process because now I'm the buyer, not the seller. And I forced him to go through that process I wasn't making it easy on him. I knew I was paying a premium for the same exact thing I could get somewhere else for a lot less money, but because I wanted to build up the economy locally. And at the end of the transaction, he said, man, when you walked in my door, I didn't think you were going to make that hard. You already knew what you wanted. I thought it was going to be an easy sale. And well, I knew what I wanted, but part of it is I wanted to make sure that who I was buying it from was the right person to buy from. So I knew what I wanted, but am I willing to buy it from you? Because there's that longer term service that could go with it. And so that's why I wanted to explore that with him, to make him go off his script and take me through that process. And that's in just everything we do, right? So I think a good way for me always as a seller is also putting myself in the buyer's shoe. I pay attention to these things in my everyday life and then translate them. How can I benefit them now in my work life? And I think that's helpful.
No, that's a great illustration because you knew what you wanted to buy, but you had one additional outcome that you were looking for that he hadn't been thinking about selling, and that was buying locally and that local service. And certainly there was the feel good of buying locally, but when you decided you wanted to buy local, you were looking for that local service and ongoing support. And he was still in the mindset of selling the way he wanted to sell. So if he had said at that point, stopped and said, all right, what outcome did we just start talking about? He would have probably had a little bit easier time transitioning into, oh, we're talking about ongoing support. And then he probably has talked about that before, and he probably could have gotten back on track. But I've met lots of sellers, as a sales training professional, I've met lots of sellers that I guided through, hey, this is the question you should be asking right now, and here's my answer.
Yeah. And I think that's it, because it's almost as if sometimes we know the outcome. And I think that's that fine line that you've talked about a lot, is that customers usually know their outcome, but sometimes they don't. And you need to challenge them through that to come up with different outcomes that maybe they weren't really sure they had, the latent needs, right? So they
Yep.
think they know what their needs are, but then there's the latent needs. And then how do you challenge them on those outcomes? And that I was doing that step for him to challenge me on the outcome so that I was challenging him to, to,
Yeah.
to help
Well,
me understand what other outcomes I should be interested in that he could provide. Because even though he's local, there probably are also 3 or 4 more guys that do just what he does that are also local. And so part of it was I didn't want to spend weeks debating the service. I didn't want to spend too much time in research, and the more places I had to go into, the more exposed I'm getting. And so I just wanted to just get it done quick and be over. But I wanted him to help me through the outcome I was looking for. And you
yeah.
talk about that a lot. And I think that's important for us to point out, is to not miss those things, right?
Yeah, see now here's the trap. You guided him through a bunch of outcomes that you were looking for that he didn't anticipate. As sales professionals, there's the anticipated stuff that that your customer will tell you they need, and unfortunately, they're telling you that, and they're telling every one of your competitors that. So when all you do is operate within that, here's what my customer asked for, you're doing, and you and I've talked about fist fighting in the phone booth, and most people are too young to remember what a phone booth is, but you're fist fighting in such a small place that nobody can differentiate themselves, because all you did was talk about what they already asked for, and that's what everybody's talking about. Your job as a salesperson is not to have a Christine or a Mark saying, here's the additional stuff you should be talking about. It's for them to know, hey, when there's a person walking in like Christine, ask her if these kind of outcomes, these unanticipated outcomes, try to see if there's an unanticipated outcome where I can fight outside the phone booth with my competitors, where I offer something those competitors in the phone booth don't offer. And now that's how you become that trusted advisor, is to open the customer's eyes to a new outcome.
I agree. And just
Yeah.
back on the phone booth, my girlfriend called me the other day and she says, I was cleaning out the garage because that's what we have to do with our spare time. And I found all these old phone books, but I think I want to keep them because soon no one will know what they are. So not only do we not know what phone booths are, but we're not going to know what phone books are. Like the old big yellow pages phone books.
Yeah.
You used to have the white pages and the yellow pages, and they threw it at the end of your driveway or in your mailbox, right? Every year.
Yeah. My wife is from Britain, and every once in a while we go back and you see the old London phone booths, the British Telecom, the beautiful red phone booths. And I used to live in a neighborhood where they had one in their backyard as a yard decoration. And so
Gorgeous.
a phone booth isn't a functional thing. It's now a decoration sometimes.
Oh, it happens in life to a lot of good things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's transition, because we have a few more minutes here, to kind of brainstorm ideas of what's coming up in season 2. What are some of the things we're going to talk about? And then hopefully, if there's listeners out there that hear this, they can also contact us and want to be on the show.
Yeah.
So some of those things.
Yeah. So I want to talk, there's a whole article, a whole set of topics and articles on what is the sales organization of the future. What kind of people do you need to have? And tell us about process and methodology. What is that going to start looking like? Is it going to change, or are today's processes and methodologies there? Customer centricity, which is kind of one of my things, and that is it good enough to just be customer centric? Do you know what that means? Can you measure it? Or is there something there that we need to be far more disciplined about than just saying, I want to be customer centric? Forecasting. You were vice president of sales, and forecasting was the bane of your existence. And I want to have a talk with somebody about the different levels of forecasting maturity or sophistication. Pricing, which is another one of my big things, pricing and value. We were this close to having you hire me when you were the vice president of sales on pricing and sticking on price. And so that's my thing. And at Miller Hyman, I was, out of 250 people, I was the pricing hawk that people came to and said, hey, I've got to figure out how to keep from discounting. corporate culture, which is a huge thing for,
Mhm.
I mean, that's kind of a pet topic for you. Why don't you, get some of the things that you can have, the purpose-driven enterprise, diversity, which is
Mhm.
a huge thing for you, right?
Yeah, I think because a lot of companies hire for diversity and they check the box. I have diversity. From an HR perspective, I've looked across the board and I have a good balance of the diverse candidates. But what they're not doing is putting the diversity into action, which means diversity of thought, diversity of the backgrounds. I told you I was taking this design thinking class right now, and it's probably the first time in my life I've had a very well balanced, diverse team that I'm working with. And it wasn't purposeful, it was accident. But because the variety of different people, we're all from different countries, we all have different backgrounds, we all are different colors, we all are different ages. And so it just is this really interesting dynamic that I'm watching happen. And that's something unique that companies aren't doing. And so how
Yeah.
can we help them from a sales perspective? How do you put diversity into action to embrace that, the diversity of thought, embrace diversity of experience and what somebody has to bring to the table based on how they were raised, what their values and moral systems are? Because companies hire for their own culture, but they forget that the cultures of their customers are very different. And so if you are more diverse and you embrace that diversity as a big piece of your culture, you are going to be embraced by your customers in greater numbers. And I think that's important for us to find that perfect balance between protecting our own culture, but also embracing enough diversity with not only just the way people look and our age, but how we think and how we do things so that we can embrace more of our customers and their diversity. Because the world is a very diverse place from that perspective, mindsets, not just looks.
Yeah, this is kind of the mirror image, or an example of what we talk about in my book, Radical Value, that the value of diversity sends tentacles throughout the entire company. And you just talked about checking an HR box and managing an HR risk, going out into sales and mirroring your customers and being able to talk to your customers in their language rather than your language. If you have nothing but tech bros in your sales culture, can you talk to an Ivy League mid-career or late career, senior executive? Probably not. And your whole plan for people self-renewal and cultural renewal and succession planning, there's a whole tentacle on how your company develops a healthy self-renewing and a cultural succession plan, not the executive succession plan, but I talked in one book that I never published about your product succession plan. What should you be doing systematically to renew your products, but the cultural succession. So that diversity has tentacles all over. And I can't wait to hear how we explore some of those different aspects of diversity.
I love it because it definitely affects sales and
Yeah.
how our customers embrace us and how we learn to embrace our customers in that
Yeah.
aspect. They'll be going through that journey as well, so we want to go through it with them.
Yeah.
I think another important thing would be for us, I want to talk about the buying, the changes. You talked a little bit about how sales is changing and what are we doing with all these restrictions and the way it's going in 2020. And your article addresses some of that perspective as well. I'd like to hear from some customers, some buyers. I'd like buyers to come on. So if there's anybody listening out here that's a buyer, we want to hear from you on what's changing from your perspective and how do you want us to interact with you. So surveys give us a lot of data on how customers perceive us as sellers. There's lots of great data points out there that you and I've talked about, but I think those need to be refreshed because things have changed. We're 6 months into this wacky 2020 year, and somebody asked me last week on my IT talk with Tanmay, what do you think is going to be like in the next 2 to 5 years? And my answer was, I have no idea. If I knew, I'd become a billionaire instantly because I could solve a problem that we're not sure how to solve yet. But I think the buyers are going to guide us through that journey. I want to hear from them. I think
and that kind of opens the whole Pandora's box of corporate agility. And we all know we have to be corporate, agile. And I was just in a talk with a guy who was a Microsoft executive who had been the leader of the Xbox. And when I asked him about corporate agility, his answer was, well, your executives have to see what changes, and then you have to have a really tight team who's ready to pivot with you, and you have to be really good at socializing that change, which is the old business school model where the chiefs are the only ones allowed to have their eyes on the horizon, and they're the ones who call the course corrections. And I think the world is going to change. And one of the changes is you've got to organically collect that kind of intelligence from all over the organization, not just from the chiefs. And so the organization of the future is going to develop systems and processes to surveil their environment, to collect those, aggregate those, and then have an orderly way of updating the processes and the procedures and getting to the right strategy. And you know, the Microsoft guy was right. You have to still have the same strategy, but you can't be the guy who's calling the changes in how we're getting there, because that's going to be too slow from now on.
And so that'll create new jobs, new types of jobs.
Yeah.
So new roles within the organization that help you understand what that strategy is and help you embrace that.
Yeah, and having the voice of the customer be a separate department is already a lost cause, right? If the voice of the customer is a separate department, you've lost the voice of the customer. The voice of the customer has to go into all of your departments. It has to be pervasive and infuse everything you do. It can't just be somebody in the bowels of the ship doing surveys.
Well, that's the customer centricity, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We'll also be talking about the digital enterprise. So stuff that's near and dear to both of our hearts, but you've got tons of experience in digital, making technology the tool, not the tail that wags the dog. What is the future of SaaS? Operating virtually, that's going to be super important.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the topics. I'm really excited and if people have more topics, please reach out. I'd love to be able to get more topics on this list. I think it's a great starter list, but I want to keep taking it even further.
Well, I can't wait for it. I know we're ready to get it started. So thanks. I think we should close out for today because you and I both have to move on to our next big thing. So I'm excited for season 2. I think this is great. Thanks for sharing your thoughts today with us, Mark. I think that all of us need to kind of re-step back and look at what does that buying cycle and that buying journey look like, and how complex does it need to be? Are we making it too complex at certain times? Are we making it not complex enough? And do we know how to change it as it changes through the sales cycle or who we're talking to? So thanks for sharing that.
Oh, Christine, thank you for a great conversation, as they all are. And look forward. I think the first episode goes out in season 2. The first episode will be July 30th. So episode 40 of season 1 is like the 27th. And then we already have our first pilot episode, which is going to be July 30th.
That's awesome.
All right.
Talk to you then.
You bet. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.